Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today, we are diving into letter 44. We're calling this Deluxe Edition Volume 1, which really we're doing issues 1 through 12. I don't know if the Deluxe split the interstitials the way that
it is. The Deluxe is issues 1 through 12. However, it's probably unlikely that if you're reading this, that you found the actual Deluxe Edition, unless you already have them. Because I'm sure at this point they're out of print. As we mentioned last week. I'm assuming
most people are going single issue or compendium. And this is the type of book, when the compendium drops, you can always find people who love the series unloading their single issues. And you can go pick them up in a dollar bin somewhere.
Or maybe they're old trades. Yeah. So we're assuming, well, I know for a fact, the easiest way to read the book now would be the most recent printing, which is the compendium from Image. But we're calling it Deluxe Volume 1, Deluxe Edition 1, because we're using their dividing points, which is issues 1 through 12. So if you are reading in the compendium, this discussion, we're going to stop at issue 12. We're not going to go any further than that. No spoilers beyond, what happens in the series beyond those issues. So just stopping, about a third of the way through the book.
Well, let me point out a distinction with this book, which I assume is no longer true, perhaps not even true when we did the Zero. But when we decided to read this book, neither of us had read this series in its entirety. Mm-hmm. Have you now done so, or are you finally taking the Mike adventure and reading as you go?
I'm going as we go. I'm going to go as we go right now.
That's awesome. Yeah. It is a different experience. And I do that mostly out of necessity, unless it's a book that I read. But even then, there is, for me anyway, something of like, well, I did read, when we did Descender, I was like, I know that technically I've read all this before, but it was hundreds, if not thousands of comic issues ago. So I remembered like the general shape of everything, and I knew that I liked the ending, but I didn't remember every particular beat because, like, how could you? Unless you just
the amount of retention can vary. So, but yeah, no. So, I mean, this is an interesting start. It's a fascinating start. I like the setup. I think I mentioned last week the way the book balances kind of the earthbound political stuff with the outer space sci-fi stuff. I think depending maybe on the kind of stories you like, some readers may probably most definitely gravitate towards one or the other a little more strongly. But I think in general, kind of 30,000-foot view of this, I think the book does a good job of balancing those two storylines, or at least those two narratives, I guess. I had a thought about going back and maybe counting up actual number of pages to see how much is spent on Earth and how much is spent in space, and wondering if they were pretty close, because it felt pretty close. I don't know about you reading it. It felt like they went out of their way in every issue to give you something in each of those storylines to kind of keep you going.
I did feel that way, although I'll say, okay, so I have a few nits to pick under the umbrella of I love this book. Like, every time I finish an issue, I'm just ready to keep going. So the nits to pick are literally just that. I do feel nitpicky, and some of this, as a reader, I think it's good to be self-aware about these things. Some of it is the book I wish it would be at times, and
sure,
that's
not
hard
to get
it's not a fair thing to grade a book against, because you have to grade the book against what Soule and Alburquerque and Jackson want the book to be. So what I want the book to be is like the West Wing. And
sure, I figured you would, definitely.
It gets really close to that. My thing is, all the stuff in Afghanistan, I didn't like spending time there. I would have been happy if he was just receiving, if we didn't see the nuclear device go off and he just got the report on his desk. And it was like, how do you deal with this within the walls of the White House? And similarly, I think it would also be really intriguing if the only thing we got of the space crew was their video reports back and forth,
Sure.
and then you could drop, the big baby reveal, which the baby reveal was well done at the end of issue 2 when it was like, it's just the 9 of them. They all agreed to be there, and you see the
Yeah.
big pregnant belly.
Yeah.
Great page, like phenomenal ending to a second issue. Like if you were pulling this in single issue back in the day, I can't imagine not grabbing issue 3.
Yeah, but you are describing a different book. You are describing the West Wing plus
In a
space.
sci-fi world, right?
Plus space versus, you're right, the book that Soule and Alburquerque have here, which is a mashup of these two. They're telling two essentially concurrent narratives versus the version that you just described, which is everything's everything's centered around the Oval Office, right?
Totally,
and all
yeah.
and all the information that we, the reader, get is the information that they get from anything outside. Like you're saying, they just get the reports. They get reports from the field. They get reports from the space shuttle, and we, the audience, are learning that at the same time, versus cutting and actually seeing that stuff happen. I can
And
see that.
similarly, if like the ex-president, if he was out there doing God knows what, and you just kept seeing the shadow of like, is he really gone, or is he meddling with things? Is he doing things instead of just cutting to it?
Cutting to him meeting with the Chancellor of Germany and all that stuff, right?
And I do think a lot of this dialogue is longer and more verbose than it needs to be. Especially like presidential speeches. I thought like no president would ever give a speech that describes our planet as a pale blue dot of insignificance or whatever. He says something like that where I was just like he's gilding the lily, and it feels like more for the reader than it would for the audience in the world. Like if you're trying to win the American public, minimizing the ego of Americans is not the best way to do it.
That's interesting. I didn't think about it that way. I did have a note kind of later, after like kind of like story beats and themes. I had a note that this is a wordier book than I think Soule normally writes in terms of comics.
Well, I think it may be an indication of it being an earlier book. I think
it
a
could be
lot
as
of
well.
writers start out very wordy.
That
Case in
happens,
point,
yeah.
beloved writer Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah,
his
early
first
superhero stuff
6
was-
issues of Black Panther
Yeah.
were just like, oh my gosh, please
They're
trust
pretty-
your artist. Which
they're
was Brian
pretty clunky.
Stelfreeze. Like Brian Stelfreeze knew what to do with it. And
They were chunky.
I suspect they had a conversation at some point, and we've spoken to Brian Stelfreeze a few times about their collaboration together, and like that's the ultimate dream collaboration, because Brian would see things in the script and call Ta-Nehisi and be like, was that in there? Like, did you mean that? And he's like, oh yeah. It was like they were leaving little Easter eggs for him. And then Brian would do that in the art, and Ta-Nehisi would like read the issue when it went to print. It was like, wait, did you slide that in there? And he was like, yeah, I knew you'd catch it. And that's when people were just really vibing with each other. The last nit to pick, I would say, is
Okay, sure.
Like, I don't love the art, and that is not the same as saying it's bad. I can't tell you in the first 3 issues how many times I thought, oh, we're finally seeing the aliens, and I was like, oh no, that's the space crew. Everyone just has super weird noses.
Albuquerque, he draws faces very severely. Everyone's very elongated, I guess. I don't know. It's that there. He's got a very specific way that he draws faces. That I can see. I mean,
well, it's not just
at some
it's
point
not
for
just
me, though,
the faces was the obvious one.
Yeah.
And when we went to the Joelle Jones issue, I was like, hey, everyone has a nose again.
Yeah.
Like they all kind of look a little like they're either way too small or way too big, and they're all misshapen. Like it looks now for the president. I'm like, yeah, he's a former boxer. He's probably broken his nose a few times.
Yeah.
That looks about right. Was everyone in this book a former boxer? But I thought some of the depictions for the space crew in particular, I thought made it very difficult to tell what's going on. Now, that could be a very intentional choice by the artist. So I'm not discounting that, because I felt, like, the space crew is obviously confused every time something activates, something happens, there's any movement at all. And I'm totally fine feeling their confusion. But when I can't tell what's going on the ship, and then the last thing I'll say, and this is probably equally on the writer and the artist. These are all nitpick. Again, book I love, and we're going to get into all the things I love about it. is the inconsistent gravity on the space station. Like
Well,
there were
okay.
scenes where they have normal gravity that they're drinking coffee or whatever. Then there's scenes where they're floating through, and then there's scenes where her water breaks, and they clearly wanted the visual of the stuff floating through the air. But I was like, okay, so I guess maybe one section of their ship is like in rotation, like in Interstellar, and it's got
Yeah.
artificial gravity, and then I guess the main part of the ship doesn't. So I was like, okay, I can kind of buy that. In which case, you would keep the baby in the gravity part, and that would mitigate the whole issue of like, oh, the baby needs gravity. It's like, well, we have gravity
Well, yeah,
sometimes,
yeah.
but there was one scene where they both had gravity. One character had gravity, and the other didn't in the same room.
I think there's probably a little nitpicks there. If you look at the design of the ship, which is the Clark, it does have a
Like
section that is a ring, and I think the assumption is,
in the ring, you have gravity,
yeah,
right?
that is rotating there, and they talk
But there's
about that.
one where the guy's riding a stationary bike, not strapped
Yeah,
down at all,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
woman is floating into him. I'm like,
yeah.
that's an extreme workout to keep to like hold
Well,
yourself on the bike and be spinning it.
and maybe that's the point. I don't know. But I think there is that yeah, that is pretty nitpicky there. I don't think they care too much about that. But yeah, I think
It
they do
doesn't
make,
matter.
they
Yeah.
they make mention of something like the storm shelter, something like that. The area that A has gravity and B also has the most radiation shielding. And that's where Dr. Hayden is while she's pregnant, and they before she gives birth, they keep telling her like to go back in there. You got to stay there just in case because we don't know what's going to happen, and that's where the baby is and all of that. So yeah, they imply that there are other parts, different parts of the ship, and I think that's just an idea that you mentioned Interstellar. From the design of it, I was thinking of The Martian, which is
Oh, sure. Yeah.
the similar kind of design of from a at least from a movie making standpoint, allows you to not have to do zero-G the entire time. If you build in the conceit that they are creating artificial gravity versus having to define a way to have artificial gravity, by having the rotational and using physics and things like that. From a visual standpoint, it makes it easier to have people walking on the ground. So yeah, I think they're meant to have different spaces of the ship that allow that.
Yeah, and I think my nit was it seems like there's a little laziness there. Like it's just convenient, like whatever shot we want to make work.
It could
but
be.
but that's like watching like a 60s sci-fi thing or
Yeah.
70s sci like I think that's the type of thing that like something like Star Wars is very lazy about, right? It's like every ship, no
Every ship,
matter how
yeah.
small,
Yeah. It's
like
got, yeah.
how could an X-wing possibly or a TIE fighter possibly have an anti-gravitational thing? And it's like, shut up, that's not what we're doing. We're not doing that kind of stuff. Like I remember have you ever heard Harris or Mark Hamill tell the story about his like consistency check on Star Wars?
Yeah.
About like coming out of the dumpster and he's
Yeah.
like, shouldn't there be like a bunch of smush in my hair and stuff? And Harrison Ford's like, kid, it ain't that kind of movie.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
like, if people are looking at your hair, we're all in big trouble.
Yeah. No,
And it's like, I do
yeah.
think that is a sci-fi thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it's
Well, yeah,
totally
yeah.
permissible to say the story's about the concept. Like this isn't.
Well,
It's not hard
unless
sci-fi.
we'll say unless you define your story by the science. Unless
Right.
it's that kind of, in which case, then if you, the author, creator of the story, are saying this is what the story is about, then you have to be consistent about it, and then you really, you
Right. You make
can't
the
get
rules
up
and
in
you
arms.
live by them.
Yeah, you can't put up in arms if someone calls you on a continuity or some sort of inconsistency. If you're saying this is just how the world exists, and then that's it, and yeah, like you mentioned in Star Wars. Does every ship have that? The answer is yeah, sure. How? Well, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It just does.
It's not that kind of story.
It just does. And you make a call, and as long as you follow that internal logic all the way through, it doesn't matter what your justification for saying that is. So yeah, if you're saying this is a story about the science, then you damn well better have your science in order.
Right. And I think The Martian is actually a great comp because
Exactly, yeah.
that is what I would consider
harder sci-fi.
Harder sci-fi, but not like Neil Stevenson, like I'm
Well,
gonna
no,
go for 100 pages and describe every element of
yeah,
what's
yeah.
happening.
I think Andy Weir goes out of his way to look at what exists, and I think he's talked about this, or maybe either I've read in interviews, but he goes out of a way when he's writing his stories to see like what are we doing now? Like what is capable now, and then like what's one or two steps beyond, because that's where he sets his his stories. He's saying where are we now with our technology, and then what's a logical next handful of steps in order for me to tell my story. So he grounds everything he does in some level of reality, in some basis of what exists now. So he's not trying to invent new things. It's like he is trying to iterate what the next thing might be based on what we already have. So yeah, his whole thing is about having some level of, I wouldn't say realism or believability, but you know what I'm talking about there, right? The idea that this
Right.
stuff is plausible versus inventing brand new things because, hey, it's the future and wouldn't it be cool if we could do X, Y, or Z? So yeah, his stories are based in that idea of yeah, for lack of a better, check me on my science. You
Right.
know, if I make a mistake here, that's on me because I didn't have that in a storyteller, not on you as the reader for being nitpicky. Because I'm saying this stuff is supposed to be important. So it better well, I better have my ducks in a row when I put this out there because if I'm saying the science is what matters, then I better have the science right.
Exactly. Now,
Yeah.
getting to what I love about the book, I think the politics in it are phenomenally well done.
I think it's really fun.
Really, really good.
Mhm.
And like, so, once you accept the book for like what it's trying to do,
Mhm.
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's just like, I think of Charles Soule as like such an exacting writer. But we mentioned in the Zero, some of his prose novels are, like The Endless Vessel, for instance, is essentially like an immortality slash time traveling thing. And basically, it was like in this year, this many scientists got together and did this thing. Like, the book is not about how they created the thing. It's like, what do you do now that you have the thing?
Once you have it,
And
yeah.
I actually think that's a superior form of storytelling if telling a character driven story is your objective. And that's, I think, what we're doing here because there are a lot of characters here. And you know that I'm usually whiny about, oh, there's too many characters on the cast. I
Mhm.
can't keep everybody straight. I had not had that problem at all. So that speaks to the quality with which it's done. If you like just go in and do the hell out of it, it turns out I actually don't mind a big cast. I mind a big cast when everybody's like one dimensional, but everyone here keeps surprising me, and
Well,
that's just
I
great
think there are some I mean there are a couple of characters I think are intentionally one dimensional. I think President Carroll, ex-President Carroll, he's still president. Well, I guess once you're president, you're always president. President Carroll is fairly one dimensional in that he's like single focus. You
He
know,
is single focused, but he's still surprising.
I think well, yeah, and I think there is something, I think it is worth noting again when these issues, especially this first handful, came out. Issue one came out in October 2013, so it is being written and conceived, at least generated, in the middle of the Obama era, right? So we're coming out of 8 years of President George W. Bush, and who Carol is, and where this is where you're overlaying real world events and ideas onto this slightly fictionalized version of our world in the book.
Right.
Where the justification, the same sort of things, right? That the previous administration they were set determined to go into these wars over the Middle East, wars that seem to have no end, have no purpose, and when that was exposed, it didn't really matter. They just kept going and no one knew why and what are we doing this? And here that is given literal definition where Carol's like, yeah, I was doing all of that. The wars are never supposed to end because the whole idea is to keep the war machine going because I know what's coming from way out in outer space. You know,
Right.
this is all preamble and is meaningless because we need to get ready for that thing up there. The problem is no one knows about that thing up there. You know, only he does, and he's hoarding all of this technological advancement, I guess, in the military. But I think by making him by presenting him in a way of like, I guess by making him not the way we perceive President Bush, in that so much of what people see about President Bush is the manipulation done by someone like Dick Cheney or Karl Rove, things like that. You know, that he was given information and Bush was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. You know, but he wasn't being active and saying, no, we got to do this, 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 and this. It was other people influencing him.
Right.
The way that they have President Carroll seem to be in like total self-awareness of like, yeah, I'm doing this because I decided to do this. This is the way that I saw it. This is the track that I laid out for us and that I think is the best, and kind of putting it all on him. Because we don't really know anyone else from his administration that's worthwhile. They mentioned some of the Joint Chiefs are...
Well, his former chief of staff becomes the new chief of staff, right?
For a little while, yeah. And then...
I mean, he's technically holds that like active chief of staff while given this garbage suicide assignment.
Yeah. But we see, like, and they also mentioned some of the Joint Chiefs. A lot of those people were appointed and came into their positions under Carroll. But so much what we see is what's presented here is that everything the country was doing was solely coming from him. You know, that he was he was solely responsible for this track because it was his plan, his idea. I did all of this, and that makes him a little, in my mind, makes him a little one-dimensional because it's just so single focus for him that, you know, every turn it's all about, hey, I gave Blades all of the information and he went and he's screwing it up. You know, he's not getting us ready. He doesn't see the big picture. He's messing up all the plans that I made. That makes him seem a little more, you know, monomaniacal than I don't know, maybe a little more potentially well-rounded villain, I guess. If you know, he's the villain in these first handful of issues, I guess. But like outside of that, I think we see more shades. We definitely see more shades in President Blades.
Oh yeah,
we see someone who
more
comes
shades
in
in President Blades, and you know, when he had that 43. So that's the other thing. It's like the whole series is named Letter 44 because that's like the first. But the whole book to me so far feels more like it should be called Project Monolith, which definitely sounds more sci-fi.
It does. But then I think if you're calling your book that, you are now. I mean, there are already. It's Project Monolith, right? The ship is called the Clark. The secondary ship is called the Bowman. Like this this is 2001 right here. So we're, and I mentioned this last week too. So all the in-world references here to that mission are all 2001. And at some point, someone, I believe, references the United Federation of Planets, meaning that Star Trek exists in this universe, which presumably then also means 2001 exists in this universe, which is maybe why they named the Project Monolith and all. Like
it's
maybe
an in-world homage to Arthur C. Clarke. Yeah, I mean,
what I'm saying is that in comic universe, like did they watch 2001 and then name this stuff after it, or is this just like Charles Soule putting his love of this into it for the reader? Because it is unclear to me at that point, because it's meant to be a version of our world, meaning they have the same pop culture references and understandings that we, the reader, do, which is always an interesting thing when you do stories about sci-fi or fantasy, right? Like when you do stories about zombies, you know, if you do a zombie story, has that world seen George Romero stuff? You know, and does Dawn of the Dead exist there?
Did they go through the 2005 to 2015 burst of World War Z and
Walking Dead, 28 Days? Like, do those things exist
Dawn of the
in
Dead,
the world?
Shaun of the Dead. Like, was it even parodied already in their world?
Exactly. Do those things exist in the world that exists zombies, or is this a brand new thing? And that's, you know, it's always an iffy thing. It's like, well, I guess people then worry about it becoming too meta, right? Because then you have
Right.
something like Scream, which is intentionally meta, right? Scream is about watching horror movies and then being in a horror movie, right? The whole idea is you have to know the rules, and so yeah. So in a story like this, and I think what they're saying is that yes, the characters in the story that you're reading, they watched the same stuff that you watched. They watched Star Trek, they watched Star Wars, they watched 2001 or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, they watched E.T. They watched Invasion of the Body, whatever it was. They have the same. They're coming to the idea of extraterrestrials with the same pop culture vernacular that the reader has. These people all saw, they've seen Roland Emmerich movies, right? They've seen
Right.
Independence Day and things like that. And I think that maybe helps. In this case, I think it helps because you can judge the actions of the administrations and how they perceive what the public is going to react, how they're going to react in a similar way, because you can graph that onto our world, knowing that, like, well, what if this situation happened in our world? How similar would the reaction be to the comic? And
Right.
you don't have to imagine a different world of, like, well, if we don't know anything about aliens, if we have no concept of what aliens would be, how would we react? Versus we have all this history of science fiction and fantasy about visitors from another planet.
Well, I mean, and the other thing is, so like if we were to call our Earth, and I'm pulling a random number here, if we were to call our Earth, where you and I are podcasting, 616,
Yeah,
I think this Earth is like 617. Like everything's just a
could be,
degree
yeah,
off
could be,
because
yeah,
this president, first of all, when I read the first issue, I was like, wait, is he writing like an apology, or like the old Greek apology, like a defense
yeah.
or a
Mhm.
rationale for George W. Bush? Is he
Yeah.
saying like, look, there was probably something going on you didn't understand, and all this served a greater purpose?
I think that's an intentional misdirect. I
But it was an
absolutely believe
intentional
that.
misdirect
Yeah,
because it was like, and I think at that point you hadn't seen who signed the letter, so you're like, wait, is this literally George W. Bush in a different world? And the answer is like yes and no. Like
kind of.
it's a
Yeah.
different name. You can't accuse him of slander,
Yes.
because they changed the name. And then, you look at this new president, Blade, and you're like, is this Barack Obama? You added a boxing, but it's like, my God, the stuff he's
Well,
talking about on the campaign trail was,
yes.
healthcare reform and this, and this. And he also is trying to quit smoking, and his
Yeah.
wife doesn't like it, and he's not doing it's like
Yeah.
so many Barack Obama-y things.
It's so thinly veiled. Like, he comes in super ideological, and then all that is immediately crushed. Oh yeah, no, it's clearly meant to be. It's clearly meant to be like just barely thinly veiled. But I think what you said there at the beginning of how the initial parts of that letter read a certain way, and then there's a turn, and you're
Right.
like, oh, wait a minute, no, that he's not being like compassionate or being like, hey man, like this job's tough and you're gonna find out, like you're just gonna try and do your best and don't judge too harshly. And then there's a turn in the letter when you realize what it's actually about.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad we both were having like it almost feels like now would be a safe time to write this. It felt way too soon to be writing this comp for Barack Obama during Barack Obama's presidency. And then we get all the good chief of staff drama.
Hmm.
I actually thought both chiefs of staff were fairly interesting characters. Also, the attack on him was,
Yeah.
I was like, at first I thought, oh, is this some kind of alien invasion? And the aliens have like uploaded their sentience into certain humans and they're starting to pick apart the power structure on Earth. And then later you realize like, oh, last president's not super retired.
It's a hit. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
No, I mean, it was clearly a hit. It was just a matter of like,
Well, exactly.
is this an enemy, foreign or
who ordered
domestic?
it? Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Sure.
foreign or domestic means both
Terrestrial and
other
extraterrestrial.
country
Yeah.
or yeah, right. It has the double meaning of like could be terrestrial or extraterrestrial, or it could be like I'm also not a huge fan of them keep calling them ETs, but I'm
Yeah.
like in defense, I believe that that term existed before the movie,
Yes,
but
which
we
is why
have to believe they
Spielberg.
have that movie in this universe.
Thank you very much. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I remember who was Ethan Hawke said like he was offered the Will Smith role in Independence Day, and he read the script and was like flipping through it, and it said something about like I'm gonna go whoop ET's ass or something like that, and he's like, this is so cheesy, and he like threw it out of his convertible while he's driving in Arizona in the desert, and then he went to see it next summer because a bunch of people were going. Theater was sold out,
Yeah.
and the crowd like laughed raucously when that line was delivered, and
Yeah.
he just started sinking in his seat. It's like, what did I turn down?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Which I think that was a movie very much of the moment. I actually had a friend
100%.
watch it for the first time this summer, and she's like 8 years younger than me, and I'm about to turn 40, and
Okay.
she loved it, and I was so delighted because I was like, it is campy, but like it
That was like
owns.
96, 97.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
an old movie now. I mean, it's
I
30
mean, I
plus
was
years
in high
old.
school at the time, but I didn't remember exactly, mid latest 90s there. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
so
that
but I was just pleased. I was like, I thought this would be like, oh, this doesn't age well, and da 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 da. And I was like, I rewatched it on the 4th of July this year, and I had a blast. I loved that, and honestly, rewatching that movie was the only thing that made me feel semi-patriotic, like the Bill Pullman speech.
Well, and there's something also about that of because not only is there that reference there, also what is their first attempt to communicate? They have the light show thing, right? You know,
Oh
they
yes, right.
which is reminiscent of Close Encounters, which it's sound and light there, but it 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 is relatable in a way that you're like, oh yeah, these are references to things that we've seen because, as we said, they're things that those characters have seen, And so, if we have this wealth of knowledge, these decades of knowledge of what we think extraterrestrial life might be, it's absolutely going to form what happens if we were to actually meet extraterrestrial life. You know, like it would be impossible for the regular non-scientific person, someone who's not in it, to not have that cloud how they think. And I like that they have gone that route with this book. I like what you said about this is our world, but just like 1 degree off. Where like 95% of the things line up, and there's a couple of things are a little bit different.
Well, let me say it another way. It's our world written with the consent of an attorney, who coincidentally, Charles Soule, is able to provide his own counsel on that of like, how do I say everything I want to say without getting sued? And that's exactly like if I wrote a story about Bush and Obama, when it went to the editors, this is what would happen to it. They would say like, we can't do this, man.
I do want to examine a little further something that you brought up that I didn't have in my notes, but I'm intrigued by when you mentioned about the timing of this, writing this book at the time in the middle of of Obama's terms, so closely on the heels of the end of President Bush's 2 terms there, and not writing it in a way that like completely glorifies the Obama era when we were lost in the middle of it, which could have and which was in the in
I mean,
which
I think
happened a lot. It
in
happened a
in
lot,
20
right? This idea that
so they
that,
probably
that
started batting this one around in 2013, right?
I,
And
I,
2012,
yeah.
2013. And at that point, my memory is that, conservatives thought he was the Antichrist or whatever. Mitch
Yeah.
McConnell had the famous, like, our goal is to do everything in our power to deny him a second term and just shoot down everything he wants to do, even if it's in our own interests or aligns with our interests. And liberals at the time, I mean, especially people like Jon Stewart, who were very influential with a lot of young Obama voters, were also very frustrated with Barack Obama because they felt like, he led with like this great visionary thing, and then he kind of governed from the middle
And yeah,
and was
yeah.
very like, well, we want to build a consensus. We want to get everybody on board for everything. And they were like, no, you got the like lightning in a bottle, like use it. So like these little half measures. And so in some ways I read this as a little bit of a fantasy version of what liberals thought Obama would be like. Because I
Well,
love Blades' instinct of like, we have these weapons. Whenever they're revealed, I'm going to owe an explanation. So let's just rip the band-aid off, just deploy them all immediately,
well,
and I'll explain later.
well,
But I also like he made so many threats. This was the most politically unwise thing of Blades. He made so many threats about how like I'm just going to announce this whole alien thing to the public, just like knock it out, and then didn't do it yet, which means, well, now someone else could do it and really rob you of what you think you're.
I'm curious about that because I feel like in a way they showed Blades as, again, he came into office clearly as some level of idealist, but also a level of like, I don't want to say ignorance, but almost being naive. The idea that you could introduce these next gen weapons of war and thinking that an explanation was good enough, and not
Right.
thinking that some sort of retaliation
Well,
would
there is the
incur.
naivete in
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
But then I can't remember who brings that to him of like the Jim Gordon speech about escalation at the end of
Oh, yeah,
Batman Begins of like you
what
start
was that?
using armor piercing rounds, they start
Yeah.
doing this. And
Well, so I think what's interesting is his original chief of staff, the one that gets attacked and ends up essentially having the effects of a stroke, right? And then he then talks to him later, after he's still in a wheelchair, has some motor function lost there, but he is the most like kind of cutthroat on his side, but he's also only speaking truths, being like, you have to do this, and this, because if you don't, this, and this is going to happen. And Blades is kind of still more little idealistic and kind of hand wave some of that stuff there. But I find it interesting that they've kind of presented this guy in a way at a time when you thought they would have, when you have a president, when you have a character in Carol, who again is meant to be a thinly veiled version, but worse, of President Bush. Let's
right.
take let's take the real world and add a whole bunch of actual somehow even worse stuff into it and put that into a president. And then we have Blades here, who again, you're right, is meant to be a thinly veiled saint of Obama, but to not make him the completely virtuous saint, like this guy has all the answers and does everything right at a time when, yeah, it seems like that might have been the way to go, when some people might have been, yeah, a little disillusioned by how things, by the potential of what they thought things could be versus how it had been. The idea of, why aren't you going out and doing the things that you said as aggressively as you said? What is with all compromise and going down the middle and things like that? And the excuse is always like, well, governing's hard and blah, 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 things like that. I think what they did a good job here is showing that in a way that's fantastical, right? And
Right.
that here the obstacle is because we have this secret that like a dozen people in the world know that there's this potential alien. I was going to say threat, but actually, they don't even know it's a threat. They assume it's a threat. But we have this thing hanging over our heads. And because that exists, that affects literally every other decision we make as a government in terms of how we spend our money, where our resources go, all of that. That is a cloud over everything. And we can't tell anybody about it. Or
Now, don't you think,
that's what they
like, I
think.
mean, do you think there is a little bit of, I'm trying to think of the right word. There's some attribute of character that's positive about the previous president, that he was so committed to what he believed was right. Because I think had he announced during the election, like, hey, we found this thing, this is what these wars are about, we've developed new weapons, like, we're getting ready for this threat, he probably could have declared some type of emergency power and got himself another term of just saying like we cannot transition right now, like this is, he could have done that, but he chose to uphold the process and democracy, even if he then goes to undermine it if
And then try
the
to
next
leave from the
president
shadows.
doesn't do what he wants.
Interesting.
But I thought if this guy was really that convinced that like human lives don't matter anymore, country lines don't matter anymore, all that matters is this large existential threat to the planet, but I'm going to observe the rules of American democracy that have stood for, 250 years or whatever. It's
That is
like,
curious. I didn't
now
think
why
about that.
wouldn't you?
Well, because you're right, because
Other than
the
his main conviction is that the public cannot know about this because he does not want the aliens to know about this. He does not
yeah,
want the aliens to know, so he's like, I have to act like everything is normal and try to do everything I can without raising any red flags. But the other thing here that like strains, it doesn't strain credibility, but it makes me ponder, how is the U.S. the only government that has noticed this thing out in space? Which is, that there's also that of like in independent states, like, I'm sorry, how did you not notice these guys till they were at the moon?
yeah,
Are
yeah,
there like, is SETI not out there actively? Like,
yeah.
it actually opens at a SETI station, and it's like, I'm sorry, do they not survey past the moon? Is there now maybe that's like, warp speed or something, and they dropped in
Yeah.
right at the moon, but
But I mean, that's a running joke, and like it's a running joke in like Armageddon and in Deep, like anything about that, like of how do you miss something like this? That is a curious. I was going to bring that up about because not only is Carol is from what we've seen, Carol's motivation isn't just that we don't want to reveal this stuff because we're afraid the aliens might tip them off, but he also has a little bit of this idea of American exceptionalism that we can't introduce this stuff into the wars. Because as he said, I don't want the wars to end. The whole point is to create soldiers, create people who are who have the mindset for it. But also, I don't want to give away our military superiority in the short term because of the long term, versus the idea of if we work with a bunch of different governments, even if it's in secret, then that's the idea of we're doing this thing for the world versus I am going to save the world. So it seems like he has this mix of like delusions of grandeur of being the world savior, but you're right, also being like, well, lost the election, transition to power, here's a letter and then I'm out. Even though I'm going to try to pull strings from the background, I think you're absolutely right that he could have been like, hey, by the way, these things are coming. And it's not just a U.S. problem; it's an everything problem. And oh, by the way, we're the only people that have been ready for this. Right? So we are
why
in charge.
Like, if you really understood the threat at that level, why wouldn't you have band together the United Nations or whatever and say, hey, we're all going to work on this because
There's
this is
also
now the most
idea.
pressing thing.
There's also a little bit of idea too of like, and I think about this with any sort of alien invasion, any sort of movie, any sort of story like that, where some sort of sentient life comes from somewhere else into our galaxy, our orbit, our world, is the idea of I don't care if they're here for benign reasons or antagonistic reasons. They can come here and we can't go there. So it doesn't matter what their motivations are or intentions are. They're beyond us. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what it is. If they come here for out of peace, but they can travel to where we are, and we can't travel to where they came from, which means we're already behind. And so the idea that President Carey's like, well, we can't let them know we're developing. We can't. If they're already here, if they've come from wherever they are to here to where we can find them, like, who's to say they don't already know? Like, how can you to me, that's a short-sighted logic leap of like, the idea that you could even keep this quiet. You could keep this on the down low, that you would have the element of surprise and technological upper hand over whatever sentient beings that have traveled galaxies, which we can't do.
Right.
So why not just why not throw the doors open and be like, hey, they're already here and we might already be screwed. But so like the hubris of that point of being like, if we do this in secret, we can somehow win. Like that to me is just like inherently flawed logic.
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, the flaws in logic here, but they're all human flaws in logic, right?
They are.
And then you have the guy at the beginning of one of the issues, who's going through like, you know, well, if it was this, then it would be this, and if it was this, then it would be this, then
Oh
it,
yeah,
this would be, then it would be this, which
he's the head of. I think he was the head of Monolith, right? He was the
yes,
or one of the.
and he's basically trying to say like we have been able to logically infer
Yes.
all of the information we need, and we know that this has to be a threat.
Yeah.
And you know, you don't know that. Like you can't know
Nope.
that.
Nope.
That makes it easier to justify whatever you
Well,
want to do. But
it's the
like
it's the
I think
1% rule, right? If there's a 1% chance that this can happen, we have to treat it like it's 100% certainty.
right, it's Batman and Batman versus Superman.
Yeah,
Um,
which he stole from. Was that Dick Cheney who said that about WMDs? Someone in the Bush administration gave the 1% line, and then Zack Snyder had Batman do that, which is super awesome. But yeah, it's the same. You're right. That opening to that issue is the same idea of like it almost doesn't matter because it's even the Oppenheimer thing, right? Can you tell me there's 100% certain you're not going to destroy the world? And it'd be like, well, no, it's not zero. It
right.
might be 0.00001%, but it's not. I can't guarantee it 100%. So there's always a chance, and in a lot of the political sphere, if there's even a chance of it happening, that's enough to justify that treating it as if though it would absolutely will.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like that they like. I think there is something intrinsically, at least the way Americans think about it, which it's dangerous to paint with a monolith these days, but just for argument's sake, I think that we see it as something more intrinsically noble to say like, well, I'm going to do what's right and I'll be judged by future generations
Yeah.
on the rightness of my action. You think of like maybe an Abraham Lincoln who's like deeply unpopular in his time. FDR certainly had resistance, but good luck lowering Social Security benefits now.
Yeah.
Like there are like all sorts of things like that where it's like, the future will judge me because I know what is right because I can see just beyond the horizon of the average person here.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do what's right. And to have that kind of inverted in such a sick way here, which I think was a direct commentary on Bush, because I think it was I think Bush was definitely thought that way and wasn't even very good at hiding that he thought that way. It was like, when you guys know all that, when you see the intelligence I see, I can't show it to you, but when you see all this, you're going to know I was right, and you will say, thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Instead, that has not happened. And it didn't happen in his lifetime. It does not seem likely to happen after his lifetime. In fact, it seems like he's mostly trying to atone for himself.
He seems like he is. But Carol, you're right, though. He is operating from the same idea in that once people know what's out there, they're going to be on my side.
Exactly.
And he has a little more concrete, because at least in his case, we know he's correct about the intel in that, as the reader, we know that they're not making up aliens,
Right. Yeah, that's real.
Exactly. Yeah. So we know from at least that point that at some point this information, when it does get out, there will be a reaction. Now, whether or not they react the way that Carol thinks he is, but at least in this terms, like, we know his base assumption. He's basing that off of reality, that when they find out about this alien threat, that this wasn't for nothing, that it was for something. And when they find out what that something is, they're going to say, I'm right. Now, whether or not he is right in terms of his judge of the public, of society, yet to be seen. But I agree that there does seem to be some commentary about that, of like people in the know thinking they can predict, or justifying their actions, their present actions, on what they predict people in the future will think about them.
Right. And I think the truly great leader would say, I don't care if I ever get credit for this, right? Like that's the leader I actually want, is like, I don't care who gets credit. I care that the thing gets done.
Yes. Yeah.
And so,
which I think is, don't get, see, correct me if I'm wrong here. Is that what Blades is trying to go for a little bit? The idea of like, we got to tell everybody about this. And in a lot of ways, that's a terrible idea. Because
I think he's thinking like a politician. I think he's like, I think it was his chief of staff who I thought this was like the best line of the series was like, you've been in office 3 months now. Yeah. If you don't tell people about this soon, you're no longer revealing Carol's secret. You're revealing it becomes your secret, right? The longer you sit on this. And I thought, I think that would sway me. If I was Blades, I would say, all right, call a press conference. I'm going to just unload the clip.
At the same time, though, and whether or not we're viewing this through 2025 lens or 2013 lens, I don't know if it's that much different. If you were to reveal, if a president or any world leader were to reveal to the world, hey, by the way, there's this thing out there. We don't know what it is, but we've confirmed that it's a thing. Like it's a sentient thing. I mean, maybe you have a better view of humanity than I do, but like, I foresee immediate societal collapse.
Oh yes, right.
So like immediate societal collapse. Like I don't picture the world handling that news well at all. And so, how much does that
even if you came in and said
your opinion?
Right. Well, I think that has to be the main thing, and I think that's why it's like telling the public is basically the nuclear option, and it's maximum manipulation. And who's to say that you go out and air Carol's dirty laundry and the public says like, oh, it seems like this guy actually had it figured out. We want him back.
Well, which is what Carol's banking on. Carol's banking on, hey, these wars here, we develop all these weapons here for this threat, and folks will be like, that's a good idea. Why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we do that? I think that's some fear in it too. Well, what's the line from Men in Black, right? A person is smart, people are stupid.
Right. And I mean, I think the only way you could rally it is if you went and, unveil the truth while also lying and saying,
is that any better though?
If you go out there and say, hey, we've detected this thing. President Carroll has developed this technology. I just proved it works. I ended 2 wars. Mm-hmm. Like we're ready. We're like, the earth is protected. Should this turn out to be aggressive, we're not going to act like they are, but we're ready for them in case they are. Now, the pundits would obviously go down a partisan rant, but I think if you were clever about that and you made it seem like, I'm telling you on instruction of Carroll, this was Carroll's project. He did a great job. You're kind of reaching across the aisle and you're saying they have to either throw, like if they throw me under the bus, they're also throwing Carroll under the bus, and then there's no politics anymore.
Well, okay.
So I don't know. It
that's
is messy.
The domestic side. It is, but that's the domestic side. But let's go to the international side here of, specifically, we see Carroll having these meetings and these and dealings with Germany here, ostensibly an ally. You come out and be like, hey, we developed these weapons. We, under Carroll, developed these weapons because of this threat up here. We ended this war here, showing what the power is. But don't worry, we're only going to use them on the aliens if they come. Like,
even though we've already used them.
Exactly. Right. So does anyone believe that? Or again, have you just created another nuclear weapon? And the answer is yes, you have. Be like, well, if you have them, why don't we have them? How do we protect ourselves against you? And at that point, the only position the U.S. has is trust us. Right. That's the only we
despite
the fact
numerous
that
reasons not to. Right.
Despite that we just used them as like a field test. Be like, we had these 2 wars going on for 8 years and we ended them in a month with this stuff. Do you see how awesome that is? But don't worry, it's only for the aliens if they come. Right. And if they don't come, then we just have these weapons now. So there is all kinds of political fallout here, and I like that the book is addressing. Someone is giving voice to all of these. So there's at least some character, whether it's an advisor, a chief of staff, another politician. There's someone there just giving voice to all these different viewpoints, I guess. And the book's not coming down and being like, this is the way it should be, this way it's going to be. They are having the characters make choices, make a bold choice, and then have to live with those choices. Like the idea of introducing these weapons into the military, coming in with superior firepower, and then having immediate retribution on it. You know, so I like that they're giving the characters, they're having to make both choices and then have the consequences for them. But in general, I just like that they're voicing these opinions. Someone is saying the thing that everyone's thinking. You know, hey, what about even if they're not listened to in the room, someone is saying it, which means Soule and Alburquerque are thinking about it.
Right.
That's what I like.
Well,
just giving voice to the different ideas.
Speaking of what Soule and Alburquerque are thinking of, and this is the really fun part because neither of us have read ahead. Is there any way it's as straightforward as these aliens have come here to attack us? It's virtually impossible to me.
That is the
now
most...
we might be in the way of something they want if they need to build a bypass. Shout out Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But like, I don't think they fly all the way across to fight. Yeah, to fight for no reason. And in fact, they blow up the planet, and it was like, okay, or the moon. And Jupiter, they don't know which one. It wasn't one of the major ones, but whatever.
It wasn't one of the important ones.
Right. Just a wild statement. But
Jupiter's not going to miss it. It's fine.
Right. But they blow this up, so it's like, yes, that confirms it's a gun.
Yeah.
But it is not then a logical leap to say, therefore, they are here to attack us. It could be mining equipment. Maybe there's a material in Jupiter's moon they need, and they're actually not going to come any further than Jupiter, which would be fine with us.
It shows they have the ability to do it, but it still doesn't show they have the intent to do it.
Right. And also, not to quote Men in Black twice in one episode, but it might be the classic Will Smith, don't start nothing, won't be nothing.
Yeah.
He's like telling the bug about his mom's lesson at the end of the movie.
Yeah. But if you are someone predisposed but honestly though, again, if you're on Earth and you get that news, you get that report that some sentient being comes down and they have power to destroy an entire celestial object, again, we don't have that capability. We as humans don't have that for any reason.
Right.
You know? So again, no matter what their intention is, there's a fear of, regardless of what those beings want or don't want, we can't influence it in any way because they're technologically superior. You know? Right.
What's the move now that you've done the calculus of like, okay, that's how much it took up. I love when someone asks for the conversion rate to joules. And it's like, I don't know. Like the fact that you're like still trying to the math on that and not just saying we are completely helplessly screwed.
Yeah.
It's just totally monumentally everything he's done, like that Carol did in the last few years, is just grasping at straws. Like there is no helping.
Yeah.
There is no helping us. Like we're just totally screwed.
It doesn't help for that problem there, but I do think there's part of the ulterior motive of like, but exactly what Blades end up doing, which is like using this, if they wanted to end a war or they have this technology here and we know that it works on some level, but how effective is it against those beings, you know, against what's coming when they have the power to destroy a planet or a small moon or whatever. Yeah, we're no match for that as of now. So there is a bit of little fatalism of like, what's the point, right? There's a little bit of that.
By the way, I've never wanted more to have like a third person, like a producer sitting here with the soundboard. Because, when you hit, first of all, we've quoted Independence Day, Men in Black, all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah.
But then I just wanted to play the Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's no moon.
We don't need a soundboard here. We have spent a lot of time obviously talking about the political part, which I think is the part that you and I probably gravitate towards more.
The sci-fi, the people on the ship is half of the story, and we barely even touched it. Last thing I want to say about the people in the White House, though, is that one of the interstitials, I really hope it's the next one, but somehow I doubt it. One of the interstitials has to be the backstory of the First Lady. Because she keeps hinting at, like, what my past is. She even says it like twice in a row. Like, my past, what I'm capable of. And he said something like, I'm so glad you didn't run against me, which
I
sounded like a joke. But then when she said, well, if you keep doing X, Y, and Z, then I won't have to. And it was like, oh, snap. That's not really a joke.
yeah, well, I don't know
Sounds
if
like she could do it.
that's the kind of thing I don't know if I would want in a backstory issue. I think you can reveal that in story continuity, just as you're telling it. Because I read that as while while Blades is meant to be a bit of an Obama stand-in, that maybe the marriage is more like the Clintons,
Where they're
where
both serious political figures. Yeah.
yes, and a choice was made to have him run first, you know, but doesn't mean that she doesn't have her own political goals and ideas. I wonder, and that's the kind of thing that I think you can expose and bring out in story, because that creates another
That's true.
real-time
It
political
sounds
idea.
like she's done something really dark, though. And I think that's the type of thing that made me think like they're not going to be able to resist the interstitial. And I
Maybe.
don't want it to hang over me for 20 more issues.
Yeah.
Like, if you've got something there, you have to show me now.
Mhm.
This is the Chekhov's gun thing of like, if you introduce the gun in the first act, you got to fire it in the second act. And
Well, is it? Yeah, I actually learned about that. Is that I think the actual Chekhov, the way it's the way he actually meant it was, it's not if there's a gun in the first act, it has to be shot in the third act. It's actually if a gun is shot in the third act, it needs to be introduced in the first act. It's actually the other way around. But yeah,
correct. Although,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, logically both stands, but yes, you're completely right. Like that way, it's not a Deus Ex Machina
Yeah,
thing. And so this could be all the introduction
it's a
you need if
hindsight
she
thing,
goes
yeah.
super dark in the last, and if she goes super dark at the end of the series, you may never find out her origin story, but there are hints, there are breadcrumbs here that say,
Yeah.
oh, she's willing to get really ruthless.
Yeah.
And maybe that's enough. But
Maybe it is. Maybe it
I
is.
just think this is one of those like there are so many stories like this where something like that will be hinted, and instead of it being the next interstitial, it'll be, issue 32 or something like that.
Right before
And
the
by
end.
that point,
Yeah.
I've lost interest in what her, like you get so used to the character. So
I'm glad
if you're going to do it soon.
I'm glad you brought that up because my next question was about that interstitial issue, and we've only had one so far, issue 7, as you mentioned. Kind of there are a total of 5. Yeah, there are a total of 5 kind of standalone issues, and they bring in guest artists for each one of those, and those are told they're character flashbacks, and I think they're all focused on the crew of the Clark, kind of how they got into Project Monolith. But I wanted to bring this up because the first one, issue 7, drawn by the great Joel Jones, focuses on 2 characters: Dr. Hayden, who is our mission leader, and Dr. Rowan, who doesn't appear in the current timeline, who is name checked and talked about, and as far as everyone on Earth knows, is part of the crew. But the way that he is talked about on the ship is in past tense. Like he is not, something happened to him. He is not there. We do not see him. He is not among, we don't see him under anything that's going on. We don't know what's happened to him. And that has not been revealed to us as of yet in at the end of issue 12. But yet they went out of their way to introduce him in the flashback issue to say this was a guy, this is the person who we keep name checking, but we don't see and we don't talk about and haven't alluded to yet as to what happened with him, what went down with him. How do you feel about that as a storytelling choice? The idea of there are 9 people on this crew, but we only ever see 8 of them, and the people on Earth don't seem to know that something happened to Rowan. But clearly something did. So we're hiding that from both the reader and from some of the characters in the story itself, that only the crew of the Clark know. How do you feel about that kind of delayed storytelling? And then to also introduce the character by having the flashbacks which that's a common thing in comics. We've talked about a lot. The interstitial, the one shot gives your regular artist a break, expand the world, but then to introduce that mystery character, that unknown character in that, so we see him and the kind of person he is or was on Earth, but nothing to compare him to because we don't see him in the current timeline. Just in general, how do you feel about that kind of storytelling mechanic and construction?
In this instance, I like it because
Okay.
it makes the world feel lived in.
Okay.
Um, I think the opposite of that is something where everything is just like very sterile and things are only here for the purpose of the story you're telling.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, to give a little bit of like off-screen history that they're not going to exposit, which in a book that is so can be so expository at times, I assume there's some really tactical choice in when not to do that.
Because we're getting more of that story at some point, right? Like as a
I trust
consumer
that
of
we are.
stories.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. At this point, yes, you've read enough comics, it just consumed enough stories to know that. Well, there's a reason why they're being really cagey about this, and there's a reason why the crew hasn't told the Project Monolith anything about it. Like there's a story there that we're going to explore, right? Right. Okay. So you does that sort of trust in the storytellers help you accept this kind of mechanic? Because you're not thinking like, well, at no point are you thinking we're never going to get more information on Ronan, right?
Right. Although, I mean, I think the other thing working in this story is some stories like that. So if that is done poorly, it's because they hint at something like that and it's like the most interesting thing going on in the story. And this story has so many plot lines and character arcs that I'm interested in that I'm like, I'll take that whenever I get it, but I'm very happy with what I'm getting now. And
That's a
some
good point.
stories, like they bury the only good thing they have.
Yeah.
Like they bury
Or
the A
yeah.
plot and they get bogged down. Like the middle of the run is all B, C, and D plot,
Mm-hmm.
and the A piece lynches on, or linger like hinges on. There we go.
Yeah.
That's the word I
Yeah.
went. Hinges on this one piece of information, and you're not getting it, and then you're just pissed off about all of the fodder you're reading.
Yeah.
And if that were the case, then yes, that would irritate me. Here, I'm not reading fodder yet, which is very impressive. 12
Because
issues.
the book isn't about what happened to the missing crew member.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Um,
and a good storyteller, you assume storytellers would somehow tie that into everything that's going on in the overall story. And it's not just, I mean, it could be completely random, but the story isn't about it isn't about what happened to Rowan in space. So I agree because it is another thing, kind of like the pregnancy, kind of like the birth of Astra, the child, like, it's just another thing. Like the big story still is what's going on with these aliens and what's going on with this thing they call the chandelier, right? That just blew up this moon. Like that's still from the space standpoint, what's going on there? What's going on with the Gomez character who has like becoming like part of the Borg or whatever.
right.
And so the main story up there is what's going on with the aliens and everything else that's going on with the crew from an interpersonal standpoint or anything about that is still secondary. It's still interesting, but it's not why you're reading that part of the story. And so I agree. Because of that, you can delay it. You can come back to that at any time because that isn't. You're not reading the whole thing. You're not reading those stories the whole time, being like, "What are they going to talk about this Rowan character? What happened to him?" None of this makes sense until I know what happened. That's not what the story is about. So I agree with you on that. In this way, the construction works because
But
they
did
haven't
you have
made
a
it the
different
focal
thought
point.
about that?
What?
Like, does it not work for you?
Oh no! I said I was at because I was
Okay.
curious.
Okay.
It does work for me because of that reason, because it's not about that. And so because of that, I'm okay introducing him so we see him as a reminder of, oh yeah, there is a, you haven't counted incorrectly. There is a ninth person. There's supposed to be a ninth person on this ship. So I'm okay with that simply because of what you said there. Because I agree.
Well, that when they say like we've gone down to 7, and he's like, technically we're back up to 8.
That's right. Because they lost one of the they lost, was it Drum?
Well, now he has an off-screen quote unquote death.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's very intentional. Charles Soule has left that piece on the board.
But from the perspective of the crew of the Clark,
they think they're down another member. And
he's
that was the father, right?
That was Drum, right? I'm trying to. Yeah,
and he knows he's the father.
No, he does not.
Oh, he does not. Know.
He did not.
Well,
know.
I mean, there's a simple process of elimination. He probably could have run the numbers on it, but okay, so he does. But he did not know for certain.
No, he did not know for certain. No, because he was on the fake moon asteroid or whatever thing the hallucinatory state they went into. He was left behind. Well, he stayed behind. He stayed behind when
right. But he knows he hooked up with her.
Oh yeah, clearly at some point. But it is not in terms of what's implied. He has not been in any relationship with her, like kind of currently ongoing for at least the last 9 months, presumably, or at some point in there.
By the way, do we? This is probably back in the first issue. How long have they been journeying? Because my understanding is the fastest we could possibly propel someone, they would still have to be in like a coma, and it would take 30 years. That and like the real time communication, like Zoom chats back and forth with the president. Well, they say wouldn't these be like radio relayed, and they'd be coming in weeks or months later?
Well, they say it's like 30 minutes. It's like a half-hour gap.
That's impressive.
But yeah, it's still very impressive. But yeah, they're showing it to us back to back. But yeah, the idea is that I think they said 35-minute gap, something like that. So just going back through, I don't have that in the summary. It was 7 years ago they discovered the aliens in the asteroid belt. So
yeah, so if they launched within the first year,
but
a 6-year journey, I
want to say Carol said that in his that I don't. Let me see if I can find it. There is an exact number. I remember.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't like in 3 or 6 months we got out all the way here.
No. Carol said it was something like 3 years ago or something like that. 3 years before. So they've been out there for a while, but they do state a number. I don't have that in my notes, but there is a defined number.
And then there's the questions of like, again, this is not hard sci-fi, but food storage for 6 years in space, even for a one-way trip, is a lot. Fuel storage, things like that. That being said, I think one thing that
they're growing food too. They are doing
right.
They figured that out somehow. So
one thing that I assume someone pointed this out, that like most sci-fi, like Earthbound sci-fi, not like Star Trek and stuff or Star Wars, because it doesn't really apply there. One thing that people get wrong is that like you only need to use your thrusters to start moving, and in space, nothing will stop you from moving that speed. Until you use reverse thrusters or something else.
Or you need to change course in some way.
Right. You just get up to top speed, shut them off. So you actually don't need that much fuel. It's just a matter of time and what your top speed can be. And turning the thrusters back on, I don't think would even necessarily increase your speed unless you could like, overcharge them or something. But there's a lot of plausibility in traveling this far.
Well,
given the right provisions,
and this is where I think it is similar to where you have something like The Martian or from any of the Andy Weir books, where you're like, okay, well, here's what we can do now, and then let's iterate another 7 steps, and just at this point we're guessing on what could happen, but we're trying to base it in some level of stuff that maybe NASA has talked about and is already working on. Like what are the next couple logical steps, as opposed to just making a complete random leap into here's what the spaceship would look like to get out to past Jupiter or something like that. But yeah, it's not really about that. There are some, again, I'm sure if you pick through this from a technical standpoint with a fine tooth comb, you'd find a whole lot more issues there. But I think
I'm not that kind of reader. Like my thing is like, I don't do that, but like unless the story tells you. Right. The more the story tilts in that direction, the more I think it's fair to start asking those questions.
I do think,
But
the fact
nothing
that
drives
though,
me crazier than readers who just import all of that need into every story they read. I'm like, I don't think you want a story. I think you want a textbook.
yeah, that's different. That's we're looking at you, Neil deGrasse Tyson. We don't need that. We don't need that in every. We don't need that in every story. But
Right. Well, although like I've never heard him criticize a story. I do have like story people who will ask him to weigh in on the science of things.
that is true.
And I think as
Yeah,
an
a lot of times it's
entertainer
that. Yeah.
slash scientist,
He knows
I
his
think he
role.
actually does a great job with it.
Yeah, well,
For what it is. Like
I
I
do think you're
enjoyed
right.
listening to him, even if I roll my eyes a lot.
I do. I think oftentimes when he gets clipped and aggregated, it's because someone has asked him a question and he answers it because he answers it in the Neil deGrasse Tyson way of like, I'm going to assume this is 100% serious and I'm going to give you the exact answer as opposed to the
Right,
hey,
but
it's
he's
entertainment
goofing
answer.
around. Even though what he's telling you is true,
He's playing
having
the
fun with
character.
it.
He's
Right.
playing the character of Neil deGrasse
Yes.
Tyson. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. So, but still though, you're right. There are people that still nitpick stories like that, and I think the idea that it's called Project Monolith. It's the ship is called the Clark. All the allusions to something like 2001 and the works of Arthur C. Clarke is meant to be like, yes, it is still science fiction. However, based in reality. So they're not trying to be super hard sci-fi about it. You're not supposed to be worried about all those real small nitpicky stuffs. You got to accept some things at face value, the way the story is telling it to you. And I think if you do that with a book like this, I think there are larger if you do that, I think you have larger nitpicks on the political side of being like, would someone really act like that? Like, who is that kind of person? What kind of politician? You may have more nitpicks on that side than you do on the extreme space travel side.
Yeah, well, I would hope so anyway, because there's it's a lot of fantasy, but to me, it's a matter of like, do I care about the characters? Do I buy it enough that I can go along for the journey?
Yes,
and
yeah.
those are resounding yeses for me in this book.
If you accept the premise here and accept that yes, aliens exist. Yes, we've sent this crew of 9 people out on a military slash site. If you accept those things, is that enough for you to care about them, given what we've been shown? And I agree. I'm with you on that. I like the dynamic we've seen between the crew and that they found a way to coexist, but maybe don't all totally get along. Everyone, if you're stuck in space with these people for long enough, you cycle through things, you get in people's nerves, you figure out what you do and don't like about them. I think I like that dynamic there. And I like that what they're showing on the political side. I like that they're giving voice to, I think, the things that they would expect a reader would have. They're not all coming, not everyone is given the idea of here's the most, they may be acting in a way that seems like here's the most political way to go, the most beneficial for a political career and what someone actually would do. But I like that they're still giving voice to someone in the back being like, isn't this kind of ridiculous?
Right.
There's always someone, whether or not it's acknowledged or accepted, they're paying enough heed to be like, there's someone in the room who's saying the outlandish thing and saying the most like basic real truth, and then allowing the story to play out of like, well, what would the president in this case do? What would the chief of staff do? What would the joint chiefs do? Things like that. But they're presenting the viewpoints there, and I like that it at least brings it up for the possibility of discussion.
Yeah. We're getting close on time, but I still feel like we have not done enough with that space crew.
We really haven't.
I'm fine with it at this point because I feel like technically a lot of beats happen up there, but I'm still not invested in that story.
Well, and I think at this point too that there is more that more story stuff has happened there versus like thematic stuff is in terms of how we like to talk about these stories is looking at what President Blades is going through, right? What are the external pressures and what the metaphor of alien invasion might be in terms of a large scale, massive world event that a world leader, the leader of the last world superpower, how would he deal with that? How does that affect his choices? There are things to talk about there. Right now, our crew on space are literally just going somewhere, and they just got there at the end of 12. You know, they've just actually made contact. A handful of them. Some of the crew have been, as far as we can see, they've been teleported inside. You know, Gomez, the one character who was injured and like kind of morphed up with the alien race, as it were, somehow looks like they may have betrayed them and transported their ship into the larger ship, and so the crew is now divided. A lot of stuff is happening there, but that's all just like wait and see what happens with the story. You know,
right?
We got the baby who has some health problems. Who, you know, you just think about, like, in this case, if they wanted to kill these people, if they wanted them dead, they'd be dead already. Just from a story standpoint, right? If these aliens were
someone on the ship
malicious,
points out
exactly.
I mean,
yeah,
it's like, look,
which is again, everyone is saying the thing of like, hey, if they wanted to, not saying they don't want to kill us, not saying we're not going to die, but if they wanted us dead now, we'd already be dead. You know, so it's like accepting your fate now. It's so someone saying that, and as a story, someone who consumes stories like this, you've read enough comics, read enough stories, you know that whatever's going to happen, something is going to happen next in the next part of the story to them that's going to make that interesting. You know, it's not going to end with them dying right away, because that's not interesting. You know,
right? And I think the most compelling point made by anyone on the ship is like that, you know, clearly they did a vote about whether to abort this baby or not, which is like, you know, heavy duty thing. Again, that's off screen. That's before our story begins. And that's perfect. Like, it would suck if you had to sit through a whole issue of them debating an abortion. Not only would it be like a highly protested issue, you know, potentially elsewhere, but it was like, okay, that decision's made. Now we're living with it. And I forget which two characters were talking, but it was basically like, hey, when did we start becoming optimistic about surviving this whole thing? Like, why does a baby make us optimistic? And it was true to the moment, but also a little fourth wall. It's like, as a reader, you become more optimistic because, you know, babies are not just babies, they're symbols. Like, you know, they're new life, they're continuation.
They're physical representation of the future.
It's like,
absolutely,
this will outlive me.
Yes.
You know, like planting a tree or something.
100%.
Like, that would be like planting a new tree on the ship. Would be a less heavy-handed way to do it.
I agree, because a scene or two, even just not even the whole issue, even just scenes of that debate are less interesting than seeing the results of that decision, which is what we're getting now. You know, knowing that they made this choice and now have to live in it, and what does that mean going forward, is, to me, the more interesting story than the debate about the hypothetical of the situation. Right. Do we keep this baby or not? It's more interesting to see, now that they've made that choice, what does it actually mean? How do they deal with it, versus spending time of, you know, them trying to debate through, is that something we want to even, is that a road we want to even go down? It's more interesting to see them on the road than choosing which one to go down. But yeah, those are all things that they've set up there. And so, yeah, I do think from the crew side on the Clark, it's more, it's a lot of character stuff. It's a lot of build up, but no resolution, because again, they just got to the thing they were trying to get to. They just got to making first contact, you know? So now going forward, I think there are more interesting ideas, because you have larger things in play now that they're the ones who are now dealing with and potentially communicating with in some way. Because, you know, because of how Gomez has melded with this thing, has an ability to understand or something like that. They now become more interesting in that they can now do the thing they were sent to do.
Right.
You know, they can participate in the story, because the reason they were out there wasn't just to be on the journey, which is what we've seen from the first 12 issues. The reason they got out there was to actually study and get some information and learn something about that. So now they can actually do that. And that just happens to be where these issues cut off.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm satisfied with that discussion of the space crew for now.
For now, yeah. I think we'll have much more going forward. Yeah.
Now, numbering for next week's, we're obviously starting at 13.
Yes.
The trades and deluxes break it up differently. I mean, basically, we're reading a third of this each week. So
Yeah.
does that mean we're pushing through issue 25, 26, 27?
Going to 24, 13 to 24.
Through 24. Okay.
Yeah. So it's 1 to 12, 12 to 24. And then theoretically, it would be, it'd be
Well, is it
25 to 30.
how could it be 1 to 12, then 12 to 24? We read
I'm sorry,
through
13 to
12
24.
to 13
Yeah,
to
13 to
24.
24.
Okay.
Yes, 13 to 24. And then, the issue, the series goes 35 issues. So that's one shy of 12 times 3, right? So
Fair enough.
so basically 12 issue chunks. So the next deluxe
like
edition,
volume 4 takes it through issue 25 or 6, but
it skips
the
a couple.
single trades skip the
Yes,
interstitials. Yes.
it skips a bunch. Yeah, so just read through issue 24 for the next discussion there, and then the week after that will be all the way to the end. So we'll get a couple more. We'll get a couple more of the interstitial, the one shots to discuss in this next batch here. We'll get both. I think we'll get 2 more issues, 14 and issues 21. So 2 more kind of one shots that give a little out of continuity, and we'll talk more about those guest artists and what characters then how that works as a story mechanic and story presentation. Next we'll get more of it. I only got one this week. So.
Excellent. All right, find us in all the regular places, mainly storiedarcs.com. Wherever you're listening, we will have a link to that in the description of the episode. Storied Arcs on Instagram and Storied Arcs on Blue Sky are really functionally our only socials. Technically, I think it also posts to Facebook, but who cares?
Yeah.
We don't. We don't even go out of the way to like our own stuff on Facebook. That's how little we use Facebook. So anyway, find us there.
The website's where to go.
Yeah, website is where to go. And as I say that, I now realize I probably need to update it in the last few weeks, but it will be updated by the time this episode drops. So find us there, find us next week, and enjoy reading. We'll see you next time.